So a few weeks ago, I was interviewed by this fellow podcaster. Really nice guy, Australian, popular show. He has interviewed, seriously, some of the best in the photography industry. And there was a point in the interview where he casually said that this podcast, the one that you're listening to right now, is really dark. And I've been thinking about that phrase for the past couple of weeks. So dark. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, I wrote about it. But it's been on my mind since. So I thought I would address it in the podcast. And if I'm being honest, this isn't the first time that I've heard something like this. So when I set out to write this episode, I had a couple of choices. One, I could try to pivot the podcast and make it more pleasant. I could deny that it was dark and just use words like authenticity and honesty, which maybe it is. Or three, I could lean into it and show my Australian mate what darkness actually is, which is far more interesting to me, and that's what we're going to do. So here we are. We're going to be leaning into the darkness because that seemed way more fun. Today, we are going to head down into that dark, creepy basement, and we're going to poke around a bit, We're going to open some of those boxes that haven't been opened in decades. We're going to enter that creepy side room that has a dead rat or two in the corner. And honestly, guys, I cannot think of a better guide into the shadows than legendary musician, the late David Bowie. So before David Bowie's album Heroes, before his redemptive Berlin years, David Bowie was hollowed out. It's 1975. He's living in Los Angeles, the city that devours souls in broad daylight. And he's surviving off of red peppers and milk and just mountains and mountains of cocaine. His weight drops below 100 pounds. He's doing things like burning black candles. He sees bodies fall past his window. He's sketching occult symbols on the walls. He would later say that he remembered nothing of recording the record station to station. Entire albums gone. A career at its peak and an artist disintegrating. And then he did something unexpected. He left. Not gradually, not after meetings with managers or interventions or a stint in rehab. He just vanished. He packed up his house in Bel Air and moved to Switzerland and then Berlin. And there's no footage of him really in Berlin. There's just a few photographs. The biggest rock star in the world. And he's anonymously rattling around the cobbled, battle-scarred streets on an old Raleigh bicycle. He shaved off that thin white Duke persona like dead skin, and for the first time in years, just started walking around as a normal man with a face. He went to cafes, he rode the subway, he would just watch people in the park for hours. But here's what the myth makers always leave out. Bowie didn't disappear to find himself. He disappeared because he had forgotten to be himself. The Duke had become so complete a performance that David Jones, his younger self, the kid from Brexton who just wanted to make music, was suffocating underneath. And this moment fascinates me because it's not when he got clean, It's when he chose in that moment in LA to disappear. When he realized this isn't me. I need to find the parts I abandoned to survive the spotlight. This, my friends, is shadow work. Shadow work is not sexy. It's not publish ready. And it happens when the mask starts to suffocate you and you realize that you don't even know the person underneath it anymore. So 3 years later, Bowie would record Heroes in that same Berlin studio. But the song that everyone remembers about the lovers kissing by the wall, that wasn't the real victory. The victory was that David Bowie could actually sing it as himself. My name is Patrick Four, and this is the Terrible Photographer podcast, where we have honest conversations about creativity and identity and finding your voice. And today's episode is number 24, and I'm calling it In the Shadows. Okay, let's back up for a second. I want to ask a question. What if the thing that's holding you back isn't a lack of talent or gear or money or time? What if it's something quieter, something older, something that you've been dragging behind you like an invisible anchor? So there's this psychoanalyst named Carl Jung, who basically invented half the shit that we now call self-awareness. And Jung had a theory. He said that we all carry a shadow. And I'm not talking about a metaphor or poetically. I'm talking literally of a psychological shadow. It's made up of every part of yourself that you've disowned, every impulse you've learned to hide, every instinct that made someone else uncomfortable, everything that got you punished or shamed, dismissed, or told you're too much. And so you push it down and you bury it, you perform around it. And if you're a creative like me, God help you, you start building an identity out of what's left. And you never stop being you. You just stop showing the parts of you that could get you hurt. And here's the crux of this whole thing. That shadow, it doesn't disappear, and it just goes underground, and it goes into your work. It goes into your relationships, into your voice, into your job. It shows up as imposter syndrome, as procrastination, as perfectionism, as part of you that always feels just a little bit hollow, even when things are going pretty goddamn well. But here's the twist. This shadow isn't trying to sabotage you necessarily. It's actually trying to complete you. And that's what shadow work is. It's not fixing yourself. It's not transcending your flaws. It's just finally letting the parts that you've buried speak, giving them a seat at this creative table. And when you do that, when you stop building walls between who you are and what you make, your work stops sounding like everyone else's. It starts sounding like you. Finally. Act 1, the creative shadow territories. So my friend Liz is an amazing wedding photographer from Portland, Oregon. And a few years ago, she shot a wedding in Northern California near the Oregon border. And it's one of those perfect days that look like it was art directed by God. It was just perfect venue, golden light, surrounded by trees and the ocean, these floral arrangements that probably cost more than most of our cars. And it was beautiful. But underneath all that beauty was a layer of grief. The bride's sister had died a year before in a car accident. She was hit by a drunk driver. She was 24 years old. She was gone in an instant. The family didn't talk about this during the planning, but it was there, you know. It was in the way that people hugged a little bit longer than usual. It was in the silence before the toasts. It was in people's eyes. It was in the empty chair that sat next to the bride at the head's table in memory of her sister. And during the reception, the bride gave a speech. So did her father. And they both cracked open. There were tears. There were shaky voices. There were times when they both couldn't speak. It was raw. It was beautiful. It was just an ache of remembering someone that should have been there. And my friend Liz did not shoot it. She had the frame. She had the camera in her hands, but she never shot it. She just lowered it to her lap and waited. Not because she thought that that moment wasn't important, but because it was. I asked her about it recently, and this is what she DM'd me. I thought I was giving them space. I thought I was doing the respectful thing, but really, I just didn't want to be in that feeling. I didn't know how to let that much pain be a part of something so beautiful. And what she didn't say, but I knew, was that her mom had died 5 years previous from aggressive cancer. Grief that she buried under her work. Grief that stayed unspoken. And ever since then, she felt really uncomfortable around death, around loss, around the kind of emotions you can't color correct in Photoshop. And when she delivered this gallery, the images, I'm going to tell you, were stunning, romantic, polished, joyful. But there is something missing. A few days later, the bride sent her a thank you note. It was warm and grateful. And then at the end of this email, she said, "Are there any more photos of me and my dad during the speech? I know we both kind of lost it, but I wasn't sure if you had any of those." It was just a question, you know, it was soft, curious, not even disappointed, just hopeful. And Liz felt her stomach drop because she remembered that moment. The bride unable to speak, through tears, thanking her dad for carrying the weight of two parents. the father trying to hold back tears but couldn't. The room silent. She had seen it. She had framed it. And she put the camera down. She told me that, quote, "I didn't want that kind of emotion in the gallery. I thought I was protecting them, but I think I was just protecting myself." So yes, the photos were beautiful, but they weren't complete. She told a clean half of the story, the curated half, the half that she could handle. The shadow didn't show up in the gallery. It showed up in the moment she chose not to witness, not to do her job. The shadow doesn't just make you miss moments. It teaches you to avoid the kind of moments that matter. Not because you don't care, but because caring is dangerous and vulnerable. Because if you let yourself feel too much, you might fall apart. So you stay safe, you stay clean, and you stay on script. And so we tell ourselves that we're actually being professional. But what we're actually doing is protecting ourselves from the cost of being fully present. And look, Liz didn't miss that moment with the bride and her father because she was distracted. She missed it because she didn't feel safe enough to witness it. And it's that kind of avoidance, that kind of emotional distance hiding inside of creative clarity. It doesn't just happen to wedding photographers. Going back to David Bowie, this is exactly what happened to him. The Thin White Duke wasn't his creative failure. It was his emotional hiding place. He actually called it an emotional Aryan Superman. A hollow man who sang songs of romance with an agonized intensity while feeling absolutely nothing. Does that sound familiar? Technically brilliant, but emotionally bankrupt. A character so removed from humanity that he could perform it without risking his actual self. According to Bowie's guitarist, his name is Carlos Alomar, even at David's most hollowed out moments, when we were in work mode, it was always about the work. David was always able to manage his decision making. And that's the thing that we forget sometimes, right? Is the shadow didn't stop his creativity, but it distorted it. It affected it. It made it hollow. And I think most creatives and photographers that I know are living in the same version of his story. So after years of creative work myself, working in a variety of contexts and a variety of teams with a huge variety of personalities and people and roles, and through my own shadow work and my own personal excavation, my own emotional deconstruction, I've started to notice a pattern. There really are 5 territories where almost every creative person, maybe everybody, hides some part of themselves. And I don't think it's because people are broken. It's because at some point in their life, they were taught it wasn't safe to bring those parts into the light. But these aren't flaws. These are actually survival strategies. And like most survival strategies, they eventually start to shrink the life they were supposed to protect. So, starting with territory 1, I'm calling it the fear shadow. This is the shadow of avoidance, the part of you that freezes, shrinks, and spirals the second that you're exposed. It's not about lacking talent. It's about what your nervous system learned to fear. What situations make you feel like you're 12 years old again? small, self-conscious. Like everyone can see right through you. And for photographers, it might be directing a team on set, or a model, or selling yourself. For writers, it might be reading their work out loud in front of potential critics. For stay-at-home parents, it might be speaking up at that PTA meeting and hearing that old voice, "Don't be difficult, don't be too much." The fear shadow is the part of you that flinches every time you're asked to take up actual space. And it's often guarding the very thing that you were here to do. So now we shift into territory 2, and I'm calling it the identity shadow. This is the shadow of disowning. It's the roles, labels, or lives that you quietly want, but believe that you're not allowed to have. Complete this sentence. I could never be the kind of person who. Maybe it's quits the job and travels, or sells their paintings, or goes to therapy, or starts a podcast, wink, wink, or gets too loud. And that reaction, the inner tightening, is your identity shadow. It's the part of you that learned to stay in character, to protect the version of yourself that's acceptable, palatable, and non-threatening. But the person you're afraid to become, that's usually the one that's trying to surface. And so let's shift into territory 3. I'm calling it the creative shadow. And this shadow is of envy, longing, and buried desire. It shows up when you see work that moves you and you immediately dismiss it. This is the shadow of envy, longing, and buried desire. It shows up when you see work that moves you and you immediately dismiss it as not for people like me. You hear a filmmaker get emotionally raw and think, I wish I could do that, but you see a street photographer's gritty, soulful, honest work and think, that's not really my thing, even though you cannot stop looking at it. This shadow isn't about skill, it's about permission. It says, if I did that kind of work, people wouldn't take me seriously, or I would just end up embarrassing myself. And sometimes to do the work that's actually yours, you have to let go of the version of you that felt most accepted. Which brings us to territory 4, the power shadow. This is the shadow of invisibility. It's not that you play small. It's that you don't believe you're allowed to take the lead. And it shows up when you defer in meetings and when you let someone else take credit, when you stop yourself from raising your rates because who do I think I am? It's the person who dismisses compliments as confusion. And for parents, it might look like going weeks without anyone asking how you're doing, and you're pretending that's okay. And for creatives like us, it's getting used to being seen as the support instead of the vision, being part of the crew, but not the author. The power shadow says, stay useful, but stay unimportant. But the truth is that your authority isn't a threat. It's the part of you that knows how to lead if you would let it. Territory 5, the authenticity shadow. This is where creative compromise lives. Every small betrayal of your instincts, every time you choose what's expected over what's true. You photograph what the client wants, not what the story needs. You shave the edge off of your writing so that no one gets a little uncomfortable. And you dial back your voice because you're afraid of being misunderstood, or worse, fully seen. And slowly, you build a version of yourself that is safe, that is professional, that is likable, and is completely disconnected from the creative impulse that started it all. This is a territory where burnout begins, not from working too much, but from betraying your voice in tiny daily ways until you can barely hear it anymore. Look, the shadow is not your enemy. It's not your flaw. It's the part of you carrying everything you were told was too much, too weird, too messy, or too real to be loved. But integration, that's where it gets dangerous. Because once you start listening to that voice, the one that you buried in the basement, in the boxes, under layers of dust, you can't go back to playing small. Not if you've heard your real voice speak. Okay. All right. Act 2. Calling this shadow work in the body. Let's talk about what shadow work actually feels like. Not in theory, but in the body, in the moment, in the field, when the camera feels like it turns on you. I will admit that I hate shooting events, any kind of event. Wedding, corporate parties, networking events, fundraisers, cocktail hours. And it looks easy from the outside. It's easy money. It's low effort. Just show up and document people having a good time, smiling executives, drunk cousins, everyone on their best behavior. But for me, it's actually torture. The moment that I walk into these rooms, something in my chest begins to tighten. My breathing begins to shallow, and I feel like I am a ghost at someone else's celebration. And everyone's laughing too loud, the lighting's bad, the mood feels a little fake. But what feels worse to me is how it makes me feel lonely, small, out of sync with the entire room. And I used to tell people, in fact, I still tell people sometimes, that I'm not an event guy. I don't like shooting events because I like control. I like shooting on set. I like direction. I like being in charge. But that's not really the whole truth. The truth is that these rooms make me feel like a teenager again. Like I'm back at the party that I shouldn't have come to, pretending to text someone just so I didn't look out of place. The smiles in those rooms, they trigger something within me, not so much envy, not boredom, but something closer to grief. Because I know what it feels like to fake that kind of joy, to be surrounded by people and feel utterly alone. And shadow work, when it's honest, doesn't show you what's wrong with the world. It shows you what's unfinished within you. And so I had to ask the question, why does this type of work drain me so completely? And the answer had nothing to do with photography. It had everything to do with memory. Because there was a stretch in my life, starting in adolescence, where joy felt like a foreign language. Depression was the water that I swam in, and social anxiety kept me frozen on that shore. I would get invited to a party, I'd walk in and I'd feel the wrongness flood within me, and I would leave within minutes, not because I didn't want to connect or that I didn't want to talk to people, but because connection felt like a private club and I never got a password to come in. And now, and even now, when I shoot these type of events, when I have to, which is rarely, that same old wound starts to reopen. The one that says, you don't belong here. You're here to serve, not to be seen. The camera becomes a shield. The assignment becomes an excuse to stay invisible. But the worst part, I'm actually pretty good at it. I know how to disappear into the background, how to smile politely, how to keep things moving so that no one actually starts a conversation with me that I don't want to have. But inside, I'm just shutting down because my shadow self is whispering, this joy isn't for you. This room isn't for you. You're the outsider and you always were the outsider. And that's the part that kills me. Because even though I've built this career, even though I've created work that I'm proud of, I've worked with incredible people, even though I've led teams, worked with brands and photographed Grammy award-winning artists, that scared young kid still lives in my nervous system. And shadow work doesn't just reveal the defense mechanisms that you've built. It shows you where they come from. The creative control that I insist on. It's the small teams that I prefer, the carefully curated shoots, the ones where I feel like I'm in charge. I'm the one that's in front to be seen. The obsession sometimes with intimacy. That's not just preference, it's actually protection. Because the jobs that I avoid, the jobs that I hate, the environments that I tiptoe around, they aren't just inconvenient, they're actually haunted by versions of me that still don't feel welcome, by echoes of room where I was present in body but not in spirit. Carl Jung said that the shadow holds all the parts of ourselves that we've rejected or disowned, not because they were evil, but because they were too painful to carry. The shadow says, that hurt before, don't touch it again. So we shape our creative practice around those avoidances, and we call it style, we call it niche, but really we're just avoiding the wound. And that avoidance has a cost, a real one. It limits what we create. It limits who we work with. It limits the opportunities that we have. It limits what we allow ourselves to feel while doing this work. And my shadow doesn't hate photography. It just doesn't trust me to survive the kind of vulnerability that happens when joy is loud and real and unfiltered. So I avoid it. Even when I know these moments, the ones that I've been hiding from, are often where the most honest images live. And that's where Carl Jung meant when he said, quote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. My fate, if I let it go unexamined, would be to stay safe, to stay small, to stay behind the camera, to photograph life instead of participating in it. But now I see it. And once you see your shadow clearly, you can't really unsee it. But the real work begins by not erasing the fear, not muscling through it, but asking, what would it look like for me to make work from that place? Not to run from the wound, not to disguise it, but actually to integrate it. Act 3, the integration process. So you've made it this far. Congratulations. But we're going to venture a little bit farther down into that scary basement. And we're going to open a few more dust-covered boxes. And I'm not going to lie and pretend that this is going to be easy. This isn't the part where everything gets wrapped up in a nice clean bow and you walk away feeling inspired. This is the part where you're going to look in the mirror and you're going to realize that it wasn't about your lighting, or it wasn't about your gear or your ideal client. The whole time, it might have been actually about you and something inside of you that doesn't really want to be seen. This is what Carl Jung meant when he talked about the shadow. He didn't mean the dark, brooding villain inside of you. He meant the part of you that learned to go quiet, the part that felt too big or too emotional, too disruptive to be exposed. And so you tucked it away beneath technique and professionalism and safe deliverables and performance art. It's not to sabotage, it's survival. The shadow's job is to protect the parts of you that were never given room to breathe. And for a while, that protection, it looks like composure until it doesn't. Until it starts shaping what you're willing to see, what you're willing to do, what you're willing to feel, what you're willing to shoot, what you're willing to say yes to. Because it's not just Liz and that wedding in Northern California. It's not just me and my avoidance of joy-soaked events. It's probably you too. It's the things that we avoid documenting, the projects we avoid saying yes to. And these aren't just stylistic or brand choices. These are emotional trailheads. They're signals, and I think we need to follow them. So here's what I want you to do. And I know this sounds like a little therapy bullshit, but I want you to stay with me. I want you to have a conversation, not with me, not with your mentor or your spouse or your business coach or your best friend. But I want you to have a conversation with the part of you that's been making the creative decisions that you think you're making consciously. So what I want you to do is at some point, I want you to grab a pen, find a quiet room, a quiet space, and I want you to let these two voices speak. The professional you, the one who knows what's smart and what's marketable and what's safe. And then the shadow you, the one who's been whispering, not that. For so long, you can barely hear it anymore. And I don't want you to script it. Don't make it pretty. Just let them argue. Maybe it sounds like this. Professional self. We don't shoot that kind of thing. Shadow. No, you don't. Because it makes you feel something you can't control. Professional self. It's not our style. Shadow self. It once was, before you buried the part of you that actually wanted to be seen. Professional self. Our clients don't want messy, they want beautiful. Shadow self. They want real, but you've convinced yourself it has to be either or. Professional. I'm protecting them. Shadow. Bullshit. You're protecting you because you don't want to feel what they're feeling. Professional. We have a reputation to maintain. Shadow. You mean the one where everyone thinks you're fine? Where no one sees how badly you want to be held? Professional. If we go there, we might lose everything. Shadow. You already are, just more slowly, and with a smile on your face, and a wall around who you truly are. Let that fight get ugly. Let the quiet part scream. Let that mask crack just a little. Because under all your strategy, under all your polish, all your good taste, there's a part of you still waiting to be invited into that room. And if you keep shutting that voice out, you'll keep creating work that's safe, respected, maybe even celebrated, but never whole, never you. Okay, so I'm going to do a different kind of audit right now. I want you to forget the grid. I want you to forget the gallery. I want you to forget your last campaign or your last wedding. And I want you to ask this instead. What kind of images make your chest tighten? What kind of moments do you avoid shooting because they remind you of something that you would rather not feel? What emotion does your work consistently sidestep? What would you make if no one else ever saw it? That's your compass. Not the thing that gets you the most likes, but the thing that you're afraid to want. That's your creative shadow. Not evil, not broken, not hiding, waiting. Look, you don't need a rebrand. You don't need another course. You don't even need permission. What you need is to sit down with the part of you that didn't feel welcome into that room and tell it, I see you now, you can come in. Because the shadow doesn't disappear. It doesn't get fixed. It gets integrated. It becomes part of the story. The thing that you once avoided becomes the most honest part of your voice. And that voice is the one that people will remember long after they forgot how clean the edit was. Okay, so this week, your light leak, even though this entire episode feels like a light leak. This work isn't just for photographers. Every creative discipline has a shadow. The writer who mocks commercial fiction while secretly longing to tell entertaining stories. The designer who dismisses pretty aesthetics but dreams of beauty. It's the musician who says pop is trash but secretly sings Taylor Swift in the shower. So here are your creative audit prompts, and don't just hear them. I want you to write them. I want you to wrestle with them. Let them haunt you for a while. I want you to ask yourself these questions and be brutally honest with yourself because no one else will see them. What kind of art do you secretly crave to make, but publicly mock or distance yourself from? Who is the creative that you can't stand because they remind you a version of yourself that you rejected? And be honest, that cringe you feel is usually a mirror. What would you create if no one ever applauded again? There's no followers, no likes, just you and the work. Would you still show up? What part of your voice do you constantly edit out because you're scared it would make you unlovable? What emotion terrifies you so much that you've surgically removed it from your work? Is it anger, grief, joy, desire? Where in your creative life have you become a ghost, present in form, but absent in soul? Look, these aren't prompts for content. They're invitations for self-return. You can journal them, wander around with them, let them itch under your skin until something true shows up. Okay, as we close, we are about there, friends. Thank you so much for going down into this dark journey with me. But I will end on this, and I will end with some truth. The shadow isn't some spiritual hangnail or poetic metaphor. It's not just the trauma that you've survived or the pain that you've buried. It's subtler than that. It's smarter. It shows up in the choices that you think are logical, in the work that you convinced yourself is practical, in the version of yourself that you perform, just enough to stay safe. It's the voice that pulls you back into the costume, the one that whispers, "Don't show that part, not here, not now." We like to believe that we are being authentic, and maybe we are, but only with the parts of ourselves that we've decided are safe enough to be seen. That's what the shadow does. It builds the script. It casts the character. And if we're not paying attention, we'll spend years playing a role that we've never consciously agreed to. It shows up in the clothes that you wear, in the car that you drive, in the jokes that you don't laugh at, and the opinions that you don't share. The work that you say you don't want, but maybe secretly do. That's shadow territory. Not evil, not broken, just unexamined. And when you finally do the work, it doesn't feel like a triumph. It feels like walking into the basement of your life. You know, the one with the dead rats and the dusty boxes and the old clothes from a version of you that never got to finish their sentence. Shadow work asks you to go down there, to open those dusty boxes, to shine a light, to look without flinching. Because those parts of you, the ones that didn't get picked, the ones that felt too tender, too vulnerable, too angry, or too different, they didn't die. They just went a little quiet. And they waited. And now they're still shaping your life from underneath the floorboards. And you want to create honest work? Start there. Not with trends, not with what's working right now. Start with the part of you that's still hiding and still afraid and still unsure if it's allowed to want what it wants. The shadow doesn't want you to disappear. It wants you to show up completely, not performatively, not safely, just truthfully. And when you do, God, it feels like coming home to a version of yourself that you thought it was lost. So go ahead, stay haunted, stay courageous, and yeah, stay terrible.